There is a number hidden inside the oldest Gnostic text ever recovered, and scholars have been reading past it for 70 years. The Apocryphon of John, the secret book of John, discovered in a clay jar buried in the Egyptian desert in 1945, sealed for nearly 16 centuries. The most complete description of Gnostic cosmology ever found. The text that tells you exactly how the material world was built, who built it, and why the divine spark inside you is not supposed to be here. And inside that text, one number appears exactly 7 times. 33, not 32, not 34, 7 occurrences. And here is what no commentator has ever said openly. Each one of those 7 appearances corresponds to a precise stage of pneumatic activation, a stage in the awakening of the spark. A stage that every single person watching this has already passed through, without knowing it had a name, without knowing an ancient text described it in perfect sequence 2,000 years before you were born. That is not a metaphor. That is not a spiritual comfort designed to make you feel special. What you are about to hear is a direct, verse-by-verse analysis of the Apocryphon of John, and by the time this ends, you will understand something about the shape of your own life that nothing else has ever explained. Stay with me. Every word of this matters. Let me start where the text itself starts, with a description so strange, so precise, and so unlike anything written before the Nag Hammadi discovery that scholars initially refused to believe it was real. The Apocryphon of John opens not with the creation of the world, but with a question that John, the son of Zebedee, asks immediately after the crucifixion of Jesus, while he is standing at the temple, stunned and grief-ridden, and a Pharisee named Aramanius walks up to him and says, "Where is the teacher you followed? Where is the one who deceived you?" John walks away into the desert, and in the desert, the sky above him becomes luminous, and the entirety of creation is revealed to him in a vision. Not creation as Genesis describes it, not the benevolent act of a loving God, something far older, far stranger, and, for those who have eyes to see, far more truthful. What is revealed to John is this: before anything existed, there was the monad, the invisible spirit. Not a god in any sense you have been taught, not a ruler, not a creator, not a being with emotions or needs, pure immeasurable light, pure perfection, a stillness so complete that thought itself had not yet begun. And from this monad, not through will but through the natural overflow of perfection, the first emanation came forth. Her name is Barbelo. She is the first thought, the first act of consciousness looking at itself. And from the interaction between the monad and Barbelo, a cascade of divine beings, called aeons, began to emerge, each one a facet of the original light, each one a quality of the infinite made distinguishable. This realm of light and perfection is called the pleroma, the fullness, the entirety of what is real. And then something went wrong. One of the lower aeons, acting in pride and without permission, attempted to create. Her name, in the Apocryphon of John, is Sophia, and what she produced was not a being of light. What she produced was a monster, an entity that was powerful, ambitious, and fundamentally distorted. An entity that looked at the darkness beneath the pleroma and decided it would be God. His name is Yaldabaoth, and he is the one who made the world you were born into. Now, before I tell you where 33 first appears in the text, I need you to understand one thing that the Apocryphon of John says with absolute clarity in the very first pages. It says that there are 3 kinds of souls incarnated in human bodies, 3 types of people walking the earth, though from the outside they look identical. The first type is called the hylix, people who are entirely of matter, whose inner life is dominated by the body, by appetite, by the immediate and the material. The Apocryphon of John does not condemn them. It simply describes them as beings in whom no spark of the original light resides. The second type is called the psychics, people who have something, a moral sense, a spiritual instinct, a longing, but who align that instinct with the demiurge and his archons, consciously or not. People who seek God through the systems that were built to keep them from God. The religious institutions, the hierarchies, the approved texts, They are sincere, they are simply inside the cage and have mistaken it for a home. And then there is the third type, the pneumatics. The word comes from the Greek pneuma, breath, spirit. The pneumatics are the ones in whom a genuine fragment of the original light, the light that existed before Yaldabaoth, before the demiurge, before the material creation, was accidentally implanted by the very act of creation itself. It was not supposed to happen. Sophia's spark was not supposed to enter the demiurge's creatures, but it did. And once it entered, it could not be extinguished. You cannot destroy light by building walls around it. You can only contain it temporarily. If you are watching this video, if something in you responded to the title before you even clicked, if there is a part of you that has always known, not believed, not hoped, not been taught, but known, that the world as presented to you is a layer over something vastly more real, then you already know which of the three types you are. And the Apocryphon of John describes your entire life in 7 numbers. Here is the first appearance of 33 in the text. In the cosmological section of the Apocryphon of John, when Barbelo first contemplates her own reflection and the first aeons begin to emerge, the text describes the number of luminaries that form around the divine self-contemplation. And in the Coptic manuscript, the long version, the Codex II version found at Nag Hammadi, the arrangement of these luminaries is defined through a sequence that culminates in the 33rd position as the moment when contemplation becomes recognition. 33 is not just a number in this passage, it is a threshold. It is the point at which the act of looking becomes the act of knowing. Think about that in the context of your own life. There was a moment, you may have been able to name it if I gave you enough time, when looking at the world changed. When you stopped seeing what you had been taught to see and started seeing the structure beneath. Not a gradual thing, a threshold. One day you were inside the consensus. The next day something in you had crossed a line and you could not cross back. That is stage 1, the activation of contemplation into recognition. The Apocryphon of John calls it the boundary at 33 because 33 is where seeing becomes knowing, where the external image becomes the internal revelation, where you could no longer pretend you had not seen it. When did that happen for you? How old were you? What broke? What opened? Most pneumatics can name a specific moment, a conversation, a loss, a book, a silence, something that functioned like a key, and after that key turned, nothing was the same. The second appearance of 33 in the Apocryphon of John occurs in a passage that almost no one discusses because it seems, on the surface, to be a dry piece of Gnostic theology. It appears in the section describing the construction of the material body by the archons. The archons, the subordinate powers of Yaldabaoth, the jailers of the material world, are described as each contributing something to the construction of the human form. They build the bones, the nerves, the organs. Each archon adds its signature to the biological machine, and it is in the counting of these contributions, in the tally of what they built, that the number 33 appears. Specifically, 33 structural elements of the body that correspond to the archonic scaffold. Now pay attention, because this is not superstition. The human spinal column contains 33 vertebrae. 24 articulating vertebrae, the cervical, thoracic, and lumbar, and 9 fused vertebrae at the base, the sacrum and the coccyx. 33 total, the axis of the body, the channel through which all nervous signal travels, the literal scaffold of human uprightness. And the Apocryphon of John, written 2,000 years ago, identifies 33 as the number of the archonic scaffold within the body, the prison built into the flesh. Here is what stage 2 means for the pneumatic soul. Stage 2 is the recognition of the prison, not as a metaphor, not as a philosophical concept, but as a felt reality. The moment when you began to feel the body as something that both houses you and confines you. The moment when physical appetites, biological drives, social programming, the entire archonic scaffold began to feel like something foreign, like a machine you are operating rather than what you actually are. This stage is often misread as depression or dissociation. Clinicians may have suggested you were detaching unhealthily from your body, but what the Apocryphon of John describes is something different. The awakening awareness of the difference between the spark and the scaffold, between the pneuma and the soma, between what you are and what you were placed inside. You know this feeling. You have probably known it since childhood. That sense that the biological machinery of your existence, the hunger, the social anxiety, the automatic emotional responses, operates on a kind of autopilot that does not quite belong to you, that you are watching it happen from somewhere slightly behind and above the events. The archons built 33 elements into the scaffold of the body, and the second time 33 appears in the Apocryphon of John, it marks the moment the spark begins to recognize the difference between itself and its container. Stage 2 has already passed for everyone watching this. The third appearance is where the text becomes truly extraordinary. In the passage describing Yaldabaoth's boastful proclamation, where the demiurge declares himself the only God, where he says, "I am a jealous God and there is no other God beside me," the Apocryphon of John inserts a crucial editorial comment. It says, "By saying this, he indicated to the angels who stood with him that another God does exist. For if there were no other God, of whom would he be jealous?" And it is in the structural positioning of this passage, in the Coptic ordering of the cosmological sequence, that the third occurrence of 33 marks what scholars call the recognition of the false absolute. Stage 3 is the moment the pneumatic soul recognizes that the God presented by the dominant culture, the jealous, punishing, demanding tribal God of institutional religion, is not the source, is not the monad, is not the original light, is a construction, is, to use the Gnostic term precisely, a demiurge. A craftsman who built with material he did not create, using a blueprint he cannot understand. This is the stage that causes the most external disruption in the life of the pneumatic soul, because stage 3 is when you lose your religion, not your spirituality. Your spirituality intensifies, but the institutional framework, the approved version, the God that was handed to you by parents and churches and culture, something inside you rejects it. And the rejection is not intellectual, it is visceral. It feels like the rejection of a toxin. People around you may not understand. They may call it a crisis of faith. They may worry about you. They may try to bring you back. And you may have tried to go back, tried to make the old framework fit, because the alternative, standing outside every approved spiritual container, is profoundly lonely. But you could not go back. The recognition, once made, could not be unmade. The demiurge revealed himself by claiming to be alone, and in revealing himself, he revealed that something vastly greater than him exists beyond the boundary of his world. Stage 3 is the passage through that recognition, past the jealous God, into the space where the real question begins. Now I want to pause before stage 4, because this is where many pneumatic souls get stuck, and it is where the pneumatic code goes into extraordinary depth. The framework I have been developing with source texts and precise Gnostic mapping that you can access in the description of this video. Because stage 3 opens a door, but without a map of what lies beyond it, many pneumatic souls remain in a permanent state of deconstruction without ever beginning the reconstruction. They know what they have left. They do not yet know what they are moving toward. If that resonates with you, the link is in the description and it will only be available while this video is running. What I have compiled there is not a summary of Gnosticism. It is a working operational guide built directly from Nag Hammadi source texts, designed for the pneumatic soul who is mid-passage and needs coordinates. Now, stage 4. The fourth appearance of 33 in the Apocryphon of John occurs in a section that is rarely analyzed by academic scholars because it sounds to modern ears like mythology without mechanism. But when you read it carefully, when you read it as a literal description of something that happens inside the pneumatic soul during incarnation, it becomes one of the most precise psychological documents ever written. The text describes the archons constructing the veil of forgetfulness that is placed over each soul before it enters the body. The veil is not punishment. It is function. The archons want the spark to forget what it is, because a spark that remembers the pleroma will not cooperate with the material world. It will not obey. It will not consume. It will not comply. And so the veil of forgetfulness is installed. And for most souls, it works. But the Apocryphon of John describes something that happens with pneumatic souls that does not happen with helics or psychics. It describes what happens when the spark is too bright, when the intensity of the original light that somehow lodged itself inside the archonic creation is too strong for the veil to fully contain, and the number 33 appears in the counting of the layers of the veil, and the text notes that beyond a certain threshold, the veil becomes permeable. 33 is that threshold. Stage 4 is the thinning of the veil. It is the stage when memory begins to surface, not specific memories of a previous life, though that may happen for some, something more fundamental, the memory of a quality, the memory of what it felt like to be light, the memory of belonging to something so complete, so whole, so luminous, that every experience in the material world carries the faint, aching quality of exile. You know what I am describing if you have ever felt homesick for a place you have never been, if you have ever loved someone and found, at the peak of that love, a grief underneath it, a grief that says this is not enough, this is real and beautiful and still not what I am looking for. If you have ever stood in nature, or heard a piece of music, or read a sentence, and felt something open in your chest that is not quite happiness, not quite sadness, but both, simultaneously and impossibly deep. That is the thinning of the veil. That is the memory of the pleroma pressing against the inside of the barrier the archons built. Stage 4 does not come with announcements. It comes with longing, with an inexplicable nostalgia for something you cannot name, with the sense that you are remembering something just out of reach. Some pneumatic souls experience it as a recurring dream with a quality of reality that waking life almost never has. Some experience it in prayer or meditation, in the split second before the mind reasserts itself, a flash of something so vast and so familiar that tears come without a known cause. The Apocryphon of John says this is not imagination, this is contact, partial, intermittent, filtered through 33 layers of archonic veil, but contact, the spark reaching toward the light it came from. Stage 4 has already happened to you, multiple times. You have already been in contact with something that your current cosmological vocabulary cannot fully name. The fifth appearance of 33 is where the text takes a turn that I want you to sit with carefully, because it is the one that modern readers find most difficult to accept, even among those who accept everything else. The fifth occurrence appears in the passage where Yaldabaoth, the demiurge, speaks to his archons about the problem of the pneumatic souls, and he frames it as a problem. He is aware that certain souls inside his creation are not fully his. He can see them, and he convenes what the Apocryphon of John calls a council of the archons to discuss the containment strategy. 33 is the number of strategies they devise. The text does not list all 33 explicitly, but it describes their categories: systems of distraction through pleasure, systems of numbness through routine, systems of exhaustion through labor, systems of confusion through false information, systems of isolation through tribalism, systems of dependence through fear, systems of suppression through shame. 33 categories of archonic interference designed to keep the pneumatic soul embedded in the material world and unaware of what it actually is. Stage 5 is the moment the pneumatic soul begins to recognize the interference as interference. Not as random suffering, not as personal failure, not as a broken world that simply is the way it is, but as a system, a designed, coherent system whose function is the containment of the spark. This is the stage that feels like conspiracy theory to the people around you. And I understand why it sounds that way. But the Apocryphon of John is not describing a literal group of reptilian beings meeting in a literal boardroom. It is describing something far more subtle and far more terrifying, the structure of consciousness itself inside a demiurgic creation, the way the material world by its very nature functions to keep the pneumatic soul distracted from what it is: constant noise, constant appetite, constant social approval seeking, constant financial anxiety, constant entertainment cycles, constant ideological conflict designed to consume the very faculties that, if turned inward, would lead to recognition. 33 categories of interference. And stage 5 is when you start to see them for what they are, when the news feels like a mechanism rather than a report, when the rhythm of consumer culture feels like a drug rather than a life, when the things you were told to want, the status, the accumulation, the social positioning, feel hollow in a way that cannot be fixed by getting them. Pneumatic souls in stage 5 often describe a period of radical withdrawal, a pulling back from participation in systems that suddenly feel alien. This can look from the outside like depression or social failure. From the inside, it is more like waking up in a room you have lived in all your life and suddenly noticing for the first time that it has no windows. Stage 5 has already passed for you. You are not in stage 5. I know this because stage 5 does not bring people to a video about the Apocryphon of John. Stage 5 brings confusion and grief. Stage 6 brings curiosity. The sixth appearance of 33 in the Apocryphon of John is embedded in one of the most beautiful passages in all of Gnostic literature. It is the passage describing the 3 descents of Pronoia. Pronoia is a word that means forethought, divine foresight. In the Apocryphon of John, Pronoia is not an abstract quality. She is a living being. She is the aspect of the divine feminine, of Barbello, that descends deliberately into the material creation in order to reach the pneumatic souls who are trapped inside it. And she descends 3 times. The first descent, she enters the world and calls out to the pneumatic souls, but they are still too deep in the veil of forgetfulness. They cannot hear her. The second descent, she enters again. Some hear her this time, but the archons become aware of her presence and move to contain her. She is forced to withdraw. The third descent, and this is the passage where 33 appears, she enters so completely into such depth of the material world that she is able to reach the pneumatic souls at the level of the spark itself, not through external hearing, but through internal recognition. She speaks not to the ears, but to the fire, and the fire responds. The text uses a specific formulation for what happens when Pronoia reaches the spark. It does not say the soul understands. It does not say the soul believes. It says the soul remembers its origin. And 33 appears here as the depth of penetration, the number of layers Pronoia descends through to reach the spark. 33 layers of archonic construction through which the divine forethought travels until it reaches the light at the center. Stage 6 is the arrival of Pronoia in your life, not as a vision, not as a theological concept, but as an encounter, something, a text, a person, a moment of inexplicable grace that did not merely inform you, but reached something beneath information, something that did not teach you the truth, but reminded you of it. As if the truth had always been there, folded inside you, waiting for a specific vibration to make it resonate. Many pneumatic souls can name this encounter precisely. A book that felt less like reading and more like recognition. A teacher who seemed to know things about you before you said them. A meditation experience in which the ordinary sense of self briefly dissolved and what remained was not nothing, was not emptiness, was something luminous and specific and more real than anything in waking life has ever felt. That was Pronoia, the third descent, the penetration through 33 layers to reach your spark. Stage 6 does not last. It comes and it goes. The material world reasserts itself. The archons are not idle. The veil, though thinned, is still present. But after stage 6, something in you is permanently different. You cannot unknow the quality of that contact. You cannot pretend that the ordinary consensus reality is the full story, because you have felt the full story, briefly, imperfectly, but unmistakably. Stage 6 is one of the most isolating experiences a pneumatic soul can have, because it is almost impossible to describe to someone who has not experienced it. If you try to speak about it plainly, you sound unstable. If you reach for religious language, the language is too small and too contaminated by archonic religion. If you say nothing, you carry it alone. The hidden flame exists for stage 6, because the people who find this channel are not looking for information. They are looking for confirmation. For someone who can say, what you experienced was real. What you felt was not delusion. What you remember, however fleetingly, is where you actually come from. The 7th and final appearance of 33 in the Apocryphon of John is in the closing passage, and it is the most stunning of all. The text ends with a hymn. Pronoia speaks directly, in the first person, and she describes her 3 descents. And in the final stanza of her hymn, in the last movement of the oldest and most complete Gnostic text ever recovered, she addresses the pneumatic soul directly. She says, I entered the midst of the darkness and the inside of Hades looking for him, and I said to him, do not be afraid. I am the one who is with you always. And 33 appears here in the Coptic as the word for the fullness of her presence, the completeness, the 33-fold completion of her reaching. She did not send a message. She did not send a representative. She came herself, 33 layers deep, into the darkest part of the archonic creation, into the place where the pneumatic souls are most completely trapped. And she came not with doctrine, not with law, not with a system of religious practice, but with one statement. Do not be afraid. Stage 7 is where you are now, not a stage of completion, not the end of the journey, but the stage in which the pneumatic soul, having passed through all 6 previous recognitions, begins to live differently. Not perfectly, not free of the archonic scaffold. The 33 vertebrae are still there, the body is still the body. Not free of the interference, the 33 archonic strategies are still operating. Not free of the veil, it thins and thickens with the conditions of material life. But something is different. Something fundamental has shifted in the orientation. The pneumatic soul in stage 7 is no longer primarily identified with the material life. The name, the body, the social role, the biography, these are still used, still navigated, still engaged with, but they are no longer what you primarily understand yourself to be. They are the container. You are the light inside the container. And this shift, this reorientation, changes everything slowly and then all at once. It changes what you pursue and what you release. It changes how you experience solitude, which stops feeling like loneliness and starts feeling like proximity to something true. It changes your relationship with the suffering that the material world inevitably brings, because you no longer interpret that suffering as evidence that you are failing, but as evidence that you are inside a system that was designed to produce suffering in order to sustain itself. The archons need your fear. They need your despair. They need your belief that this, the material, the biological, the social, is the sum total of what you are. Because the moment you withdraw that belief, even partially, even imperfectly, the containment system loses traction, not all at once, but measurably. Stage 7 is the beginning of what the Apocryphon of John calls the return. Not a physical return, not death as escape. The Gnostic texts are very clear on this. The pneumatic soul that has genuinely awakened does not need to wait for the death of the body to begin the return. The return begins the moment the identification shifts, the moment the spark stops believing it is the scaffold. And the evidence that this has begun, the evidence that stage 7 is genuinely active and not just intellectually adopted, is precisely this. You are no longer looking for an external authority to confirm your reality. You are checking the external texts, the ancient frameworks, the Gnostic cosmologies, not because you need them to validate what you know, but because you want to understand the shape of what you already directly experience. That is why you are here. Not to be convinced, to be confirmed. The Apocryphon of John was sealed in a clay jar and buried in the Egyptian desert for 16 centuries. Buried, the scholars speculate, by monks who feared the destruction of their library in the Christian purges of the 4th century. Buried at a place called Jabal al-Tarif in the cliffs above the Nile. And there it sat in dry darkness, while the world above it reorganized itself around a version of Christianity that had systematically removed every trace of the Pneumatic tradition, every reference to Barbello, every mention of Yaldabaoth, every passage that said, "The God of the official religion is not the source." That said, you are not a sinner in need of rescue from a loving Creator. You are a divine spark in need of remembering within a hostile creation. The library was not supposed to survive. Whoever buried it had no guarantee it would ever be found. They buried it anyway, because the knowledge it contained could not be allowed to disappear entirely. Because there are always pneumatic souls in every generation, and in every generation those souls need coordinates. The coordinates were recovered in 1945. The same year that other secrets were being uncovered, other structures of deception exposed, other certainties about the world shattered. The same year the atomic bomb was detonated and the first photographs of the Nazi death camps were published. The year the world discovered what archonic systems could build when given total power. And from the desert, in the same year, came the answer that had been buried for 16 centuries. From a clay jar, 33 layers of certainty dissolved by a single text. Because the Apocryphon of John does not tell you to believe something, it tells you to remember something. It tells you that the divine forethought, the pronoia, did not abandon the pneumatic souls in the material creation. That every generation, through channels the archons cannot fully control, the light finds a way through. Through art, through philosophy, through chance encounters, through dreams, through moments of inexplicable grace at 3 in the morning when everything else has gone quiet, and something inside you whispers that it knows what it is and where it comes from. Through videos watched at 2 in the morning by people who cannot explain why they clicked. The 7 appearances of 33 in the Apocryphon of John are not coincidental numerology. They are a map of the pneumatic journey written by people who had already walked it, written according to the text itself as the direct vision of John in the desert, as a revelation given not through institutional authority, but through direct encounter with something that transcended the archonic structure. And you have walked it. Every stage. Some stages were violent, some stages were silent and slow. Some stages lasted years, and some lasted a single night. You may not have had language for what was happening. You may have interpreted some of the stages as mental health crises, or relationship failures, or vocational confusion, or inexplicable grief. The stage 2, recognition of the prison, can look indistinguishable from depression to someone who does not have the Gnostic map. The stage 4, thinning of the veil, can look indistinguishable from dissociation. The stage 5, recognition of the interference, can look indistinguishable from paranoia. But you are not depressed. You are not dissociating. You are not paranoid. You are a pneumatic soul at stage 7 of an activation process that was described in precise structural detail in a text that is now almost 2,000 years old, a text that was buried so it could survive, a text that was found at exactly the moment it needed to be found, a text that a figure named John received in a desert, in grief, in the ruins of everything he thought he had understood, because something vast and luminous decided that the darkness of that moment was exactly where the revelation needed to land. The Apocryphon of John ends with Pronoia's words. She descended 33 layers deep and found the spark. She said, "I raised him up and sealed him in the light of the water with 5 seals, in order that death might not have power over him from this time on." 5 seals, 5 acts of protection. And the text closes. It does not close with instruction. It does not close with commandments or requirements or conditions. It closes with an act already completed, the sealing of the spark against the final authority of death, the confirmation that whatever the material world does to the pneumatic soul, whatever the archonic scaffold produces, however many times the veil descends, however effective the 33 strategies of interference, the spark itself is sealed. It is protected, not because you earned it, not because you followed the right religion or performed the right practices, because the divine forethought, the pronoia, descended far enough and deep enough to reach it, and the act of reaching it sealed it. You do not need to do anything to become what you already are. You only need to remember it. The number 33 appears 7 times in the Apocryphon of John, and now you know what each appearance means. You know that the ancient mind that encoded those 7 appearances was describing a journey it expected you to take. A journey it trusted future pneumatic souls would recognize when they encountered it. A journey for which it left, in the desert, in clay, in Coptic script, sealed and buried and waiting, exact coordinates. You have already passed all 7 stages, not to their completion. The journey does not complete inside the material world, but the trajectory is set. The recognition has happened. The memory, however partial, has surfaced. The interference has been named. The paranoia has made contact. The identification with the scaffold is loosening. The spark knows what it is. That is enough. That has always been enough.